Officer Miles Brenner thought it was just another routine stop, until he pulled a gun on the wrong black woman. Jasmine Carter wasn't speeding, wasn't reckless, just driving her BMW through a wealthy Tennessee suburb. But to Brenner, a black woman in a luxury car didn't belong. Calm, poised, and recording from the start, Jasmine challenged his every false claim. When he reached for his weapon, she said 7 words that shattered his world. "My husband is the FBI director." What happened next stunned the nation. Subscribe for real stories that expose racism, demand justice, and hold power accountable. Jasmine Carter's hands shook as she clutched the steering wheel, the cold stare of Officer Miles Brenner burning into her from just outside her window. She had never thought this drive home would turn into something like this. She lived here. She knew every street, every turn, every neighbor's dog that barked too loud. But now, none of that mattered. Not to him. To Officer Brenner, she was just a black woman in the wrong car, in the wrong neighborhood, and to him, that was enough. He had already accused her of not signaling, but they both knew that wasn't the reason. She had driven this road 1,000 times and signaled every single time. Still, he asked questions that had nothing to do with traffic. Where she was going, if she lived around here, why she looked too confident. Jasmine knew the game. She had seen this happen to others. But now, it was her. Her heart pounded as she glanced at her phone, still recording everything. She had hoped that would be enough to keep her safe, to keep him in check. But Officer Brenner's face said something different. He was irritated. She hadn't bowed her head or rushed to apologize. She didn't shrink. And that made him mad. She could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his fingers hovered just a little too close to his gun. She tried to stay calm. She kept her voice steady. "I have nothing else to say," she told him. "Either write the ticket or let me go." But instead of walking back to his car, he did the unthinkable. He reached for her door handle. Jasmine's reflexes kicked in, and she hit the lock just in time. Her body went stiff. Her mouth went dry. Her mind screamed, "Run!" But where could she go? "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he growled, his hand inching toward his holster. She knew what that meant. She had heard too many stories that ended with someone who looked like her being shot for moving too fast, talking too loud, or simply existing. "Step out of the car," he demanded. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his gun. In that moment, time slowed. Jasmine wanted to flee. She thought of pressing the gas, speeding away, leaving him behind. But she knew how that would end. They'd chase her. They'd say she ran because she was guilty. They'd twist the story. The footage on her phone might not be enough. She was trapped. Her fingers clenched around the phone. "I'm recording," she said, loud and firm. But Brenner didn't care. He pulled the gun anyway, lifting it without hesitation, pointing it directly at her through the glass. A gasp from across the street. A neighbor pulling out their phone. Another stepping outside with a dog. Eyes were on him now. Jasmine knew it. He knew it, but he still didn't back down. "Open the door," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jasmine stayed frozen. Her mouth went dry. Her chest rose and fell with every shallow breath. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she whispered, barely above a breath. But he heard it. Then, a voice behind him. "Officer Brenner, stand down." He flinched, turned. A taller officer was marching up the sidewalk, face tight with fury. "Lower your weapon. Now." That voice. It was a commanding officer. Jasmine didn't know his name, but she knew what that tone meant. Brenner didn't want to obey. His hands shook. His face twisted in rage. But the gun lowered. Slowly. Tension snapped in the air like a cord pulled too tight. Jasmine didn't move. Her muscles ached from staying still so long, but she couldn't relax. Not yet. The other officer stepped in front of Brenner. "Badge and gun, now." Brenner's face went pale. Jasmine watched as the same man who held power over her just seconds ago now trembled like a child. He unpinned his badge, unclipped his holster, handed everything over. Jasmine should have felt relief, but all she felt was the weight of what almost happened. The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared at Brenner. "I want my license and registration back," she said calmly. He handed them over without a word. Tossed them, really. Like they didn't matter. Like she didn't matter. But she caught them. And then she looked him in the eye. "My name is Jasmine Carter. My husband is Director Stephen Carter of the FBI." The silence that followed was deafening. Brenner's mouth opened slightly. He blinked, finally understanding the weight of what he'd done. This wasn't just a woman in a nice car. This was a woman who had the power to end his career, and now she had a recording of everything. The officer beside him sucked in a breath. "You pulled a weapon on the wife of the FBI director?" His voice dropped to a whisper. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't need to. By the time she made it home, the video had already gone viral. Friends called. Colleagues messaged. Journalists sent emails. But the call that mattered came from her husband. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight. "I'm home," she whispered. He was already on the phone with the Justice Department. By morning, Miles Brenner's face was on every news channel. The headlines screamed, "Cop pulls gun on FBI director's wife." But Jasmine wasn't just a headline. She was a mirror of every black woman pulled over for looking out of place. She was a voice for every person who didn't make it home. She had tried everything to stay calm. She had followed every rule. She had spoken with respect. And still, a gun was pointed at her. That's why she shared her story. Not for sympathy, but for truth. Because not everyone has a husband who can make phone calls that move mountains. Not everyone gets to live. Jasmine Carter survived, but she shouldn't have had to fight that hard just to drive home. If you believe her story matters, if you believe truth like this should be heard, subscribe now. Because silence is no longer an option. Jasmine Carter didn't sleep that night, not really. Her body lay in bed, but her mind kept replaying every second. Every word, every breath she took while Officer Miles Brenner pointed a gun at her through the window of her car. Her husband, FBI Director Stephen Carter, had called in half the Justice Department before sunrise, and within hours, Brenner was placed on indefinite suspension, pending investigation. But Jasmine wasn't celebrating. Because deep down, what haunted her most wasn't just the gun, or the humiliation, or the fact that she had nearly died in her own neighborhood. It was how normal it had all felt, how expected it had become. And that truth stayed with her like a shadow. The days that followed were a blur of media attention, statements, and silence. Oh, so much silence. From people she thought would speak up, from friends who said they were allies, until her story made them uncomfortable. "I'm so sorry that happened to you," they texted, followed by nothing. The same people who had invited her to charity galas and PTA fundraisers in Brentwood now avoided her at the grocery store. They didn't say it out loud, but she heard them anyway. Why did she have to make it a big deal? Why did she have to bring race into it? But how could she not? She had looked down the barrel of a loaded gun just for being a black woman behind the wheel of a luxury car in a rich white suburb. And they wanted her to just smile through it? Be grateful she wasn't killed? Jasmine tried to hold herself together, but the pressure crushed her quietly, slowly. Every time she left the house, she felt eyes on her. Not just strangers, but familiar ones. Neighbors who now saw her as a disruptor, a reminder of something they didn't want to face. Her inbox was flooded. Some emails were kind. Many weren't. "You people always play the race card. Maybe you should have just gotten out of the car. You brought it on yourself." One email simply read, "Next time, you might not be so lucky." She didn't tell Stephen about that one. She knew what he'd do, but she didn't want more men with badges showing up at her door. That was what got her in trouble in the first place. She stopped jogging her usual route, changed her routine, made sure never to drive alone after dark, even though she had done so for years without fear. Every time a patrol car turned onto her street, her stomach twisted into knots. Was it someone new? Someone looking to teach her a lesson for what she did to Brenner? And still, she kept pushing. She gave interviews. She spoke at forums. She answered questions with calm, measured grace, even when the questions were designed to trap her. "Do you believe Officer Brenner is racist? Why didn't you just comply immediately? Do you feel guilty that his career is ruined?" Guilty? No. Angry that it ever happened? Yes. But guilt? That belonged to the man who saw her as a threat before he ever asked her name. The hardest part wasn't the public attention. It was the quiet pain, the kind that no headline ever captures, the memories she couldn't escape. Like the time she and Stephen were newlyweds, and he was pulled out of their car and pinned to the ground because he fit the description. Or the time their son, Marcus, barely 13, was accused of shoplifting because he had his hands in his hoodie pocket. Or the moment when Jasmine realized that no matter how high she climbed, no matter how many degrees she earned, how powerful her husband was, she would never be safe in their world. Even her 8-year-old daughter, Layla, noticed the change. "Why did the man point a gun at you, Mommy?" she asked one night. Jasmine froze. What do you say to a child who still believes police are heroes? That night, Jasmine sat beside Layla's bed and cried quietly into her hands, not wanting to shake her daughter's innocence. But Layla heard anyway. "Don't cry, Mommy," she whispered. "Next time, I'll protect you." Jasmine broke inside. Her daughter shouldn't have to protect her. She should be dancing, laughing, dreaming, not worried about her mother getting gunned down in the front seat of a car. The hardest moment came 2 weeks after the incident. Jasmine was invited to speak at a community town hall. She almost said no. She was tired, emotionally wrecked. But she knew there would be young girls in that room who looked like her, who needed to see her still standing. So she wore a soft gray suit, pinned her curls neatly, and stood behind a podium to face a room of neighbors, strangers, and cameras. She spoke not with rage, but with truth. Simple, clear, painful. I followed every instruction. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice, and still I had a gun pointed at me. She paused. Ask yourself, if I hadn't been married to the FBI director, would I still be here? The room fell silent. That night, the video of her speech went viral again. Some praised her strength, others attacked her character. She's just doing this for attention, they said. She's blowing it out of proportion. But Jasmine didn't flinch anymore, because behind those cruel comments were the eyes of her daughter, the trembling voice of her son, and the empty silence of every mother who had buried a child because of someone like Miles Brenner. The legal process began slowly. Investigations were opened. Statements were taken. Brenner hired a lawyer who claimed he was under stress, that he feared for his safety. She was being evasive, he said. She locked the door. That's suspicious behavior. Suspicious? Because she protected herself. Jasmine sat through every deposition, every meeting, every court proceeding, holding herself together while lawyers tried to twist her truth into something ugly. They questioned her tone, her posture, her intentions. But they never questioned the gun. Isn't that something? Still, she didn't back down. She pushed through the exhaustion, the media spins, the whisper campaigns in her neighborhood, the PTA moms who suddenly forgot to include her on group emails. She kept speaking, kept writing, kept fighting, because deep down, Jasmine knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the thousands who never got to tell their story, who didn't have a phone recording, who didn't have a powerful husband, who didn't make it home. And then, one morning, the news broke. Officer Miles Brenner had officially been terminated from the department. The review board found him guilty of misconduct, excessive use of force, and racial profiling. He wouldn't wear a badge again. The department issued a public apology. Training protocols were revised. Body cameras became mandatory. Jasmine's name was etched into a movement. But the scars remained. Even with justice served, Jasmine still checked over her shoulder at night. Still kept her phone charged at 100%. Still coached her children on how to stay safe during a traffic stop. Because justice doesn't erase trauma. It only proves it was real. And yet, she smiled again. Not because she had won, but because she survived. Jasmine Carter became more than a woman pulled over. She became a reminder that dignity matters, that silence protects no one, that speaking up, no matter the fear, is the only way forward. Her pain became power. Her suffering sparked change, and through every broken piece of her spirit, she stitched something stronger. So if you're reading this, if you've ever wondered if your voice matters, it does. If you believe Jasmine's story should be heard, share it. If you believe racism still needs to be called out, fought, and stopped, speak up. And if you want more real stories that demand truth, courage, and justice, subscribe. Because Jasmine's story isn't the end, it's the beginning. Jasmine Carter stood before the mirror, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the pearl earring that kept slipping through her fingers. Her reflection looked calm, but inside, she felt like she was being held together by thread. It had been weeks since that night. The gun, the fear, the moment Officer Miles Brenner pulled a weapon on her for nothing more than driving while black. She had spoken at community town halls, faced news anchors trying to poke holes in her truth, sat across from legal teams who asked her why she didn't just step out of the car. But none of it had prepared her for this moment. Today, she was walking into the courtroom, not just as a witness, but as the woman who had lived. And the pressure of being that woman was crushing. Stephen, her husband, stood in the doorway, tie knotted tight, FBI credentials tucked into his blazer, his face unreadable. He had fought this war for her in rooms she'd never see, made calls that rattled entire departments. But even with all his power, he couldn't erase what had been done. "You ready?" he asked. Jasmine inhaled deeply. "As I'll ever be." They walked out together, side by side, but Jasmine could feel the weight resting solely on her shoulders. This wasn't just a court date. This was proof to the world, to herself, that her pain mattered. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Brenner sat across from her, dressed in a sharp suit that couldn't hide the arrogance still clinging to his posture. He didn't look at her. Not once. Not even when the footage played. The video, grainy but clear, showed everything. His hand reaching for the door, his voice ordering her out, the gun raised, the crowd gathering, the trembling in her voice when she said, You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Jasmine watched it play on the screen like she was watching someone else. A woman brave and composed, someone who didn't let fear win. But she remembered what the video didn't capture. The way her breath caught in her throat, the way her fingers nearly dropped her phone, the sweat that trickled down her spine as the muzzle of the gun stared her down. She remembered the way her heart had screamed at her to run while her body froze in place, knowing any movement might be her last. The prosecution asked her to stand and testify. As she rose, her knees felt weak. Not from fear of the courtroom, but from the weight of everything she carried. She looked out at the room, packed with reporters, strangers, neighbors who used to wave, but now only watched. She saw her children in the back row, sitting with her sister. Eyes wide, unsure of why their mother had to be this strong in the first place. She locked eyes with Stephen and took a breath. "I was calm," she began, her voice firm but low. "I followed instructions. I answered every question. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resist. And still he pulled a gun on me." The silence was immediate, heavy. "He saw my skin, and he saw a threat. That's the truth. And if I had flinched, if I had opened my door, if I had moved too quickly, I wouldn't be standing here right now." A tear slipped down her cheek, uninvited, but she didn't wipe it away. Let them see it. Let them see the woman after the news cycle, after the camera flashes, the one who had to piece herself back together every morning just to keep going. "I didn't come here to destroy a man's life," she said, glancing at Brenner. "I came here because mine could have been destroyed in a second, and too many others have been." The judge's eyes didn't waver. The jury watched her like they were seeing the world through her eyes for the first time. Jasmine returned to her seat, her hands cold, but her spine straight. She had told her truth. But the hardest part came after. That night, as she walked to her car under the courthouse lights, a shadow stepped out from the edge of the parking lot. Jasmine froze. Stephen was ahead of her, talking with their attorney. She gripped her purse. The man stepped closer. Middle-aged, white, baseball cap pulled low. Jasmine tensed, her body remembering everything. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice cracked. "I used to be a cop, retired now, watched your story, watched that video over and over," he paused. "I was like him once, not pulling a gun, but assuming things, judging too quick." He lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry for what you went through. And thank you for not letting it go quiet." Jasmine didn't know what to say. She just nodded. And as he walked away, she realized something. Maybe not everyone would change, but some would. And that was enough to keep speaking. The threats still came, online, through fake emails. One night, someone left a note in her mailbox. "You ruined a good cop's life." Stephen wanted to move, increase security, but Jasmine refused to hide. She hosted open forums, visited schools, stood on stages that made her knees buckle. Not because she loved the spotlight, but because silence would only let this happen to someone else. One rainy afternoon, a young girl approached her after a panel. Barely 16, a skin the color of honey, eyes filled with tears. "My brother was shot during a traffic stop last year. They said he reached for something. It was his wallet. He didn't make it." Jasmine pulled her into a hug. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. The girl held on tightly. "But when I saw you stand up to that cop, it made me feel like maybe I could too." That night, Jasmine cried harder than she had in weeks, because that's what all of this was for the girl whose brother didn't come home, for the mother afraid to let her son drive at night, for the man who used to be part of the problem, but now stood with her in the rain. Brenner's trial dragged on. His defense tried everything: stress, protocol, miscommunication. But the jury saw through it. When the verdict came back, guilty of misconduct, abuse of authority, and reckless endangerment, Jasmine didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just closed her eyes and exhaled. Justice was never joy. It was relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones flashing. "Do you have any final words?" someone shouted. Jasmine stepped up. "This wasn't just about me," she said. "This was about the system that allowed this to happen. It's not over, but it's a start. So, if you're listening to this, if you felt her fear, if you heard her truth, if you want her strength to be seen and felt by the world, press the like button. Not just for Jasmine, but for every voice still trembling, every story still untold, every person still afraid to drive, to walk, to exist. Like this video, to stand with her. Share it to show the world that her courage matters. Because what happened to Jasmine Carter wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a reflection of a system that too often breaks people like her. But today, Jasmine didn't break. She rose. Jasmine Carter wasn't always the woman you saw on TV. The one standing in courtrooms, giving speeches, becoming the face of resilience. No, before the headlines, before Officer Brenner, before the viral footage and the national outrage, Jasmine was living a different life. A quiet one. Or at least, that's what people thought. What they didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Jasmine Carter had been walking a razor's edge long before a gun was ever pointed at her face. Because years ago, Jasmine did something no one expected. Something dangerous, something unbelievable. And it's that hidden past that gave her the strength to survive what happened that night on the side of the road. It all started 10 years ago, long before she married Stephen Carter, long before anyone knew her name. Back then, Jasmine worked as a translator for the Department of State, fluent in 4 languages. Brilliant and unnoticed, she was often the one sitting quietly in the corner of high-level meetings, transcribing every word, while men in suits made decisions that would ripple across nations. But Jasmine saw everything. She saw who lied, who cut backroom deals, who signed things in the dark. And one day, she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Something buried in a closed-door negotiation between 2 high-ranking officials from different continents. A shipment, a name, a list. She could have walked away, but she didn't. She copied the list and kept it hidden. And that list? It included the names of trafficked children routed through embassies, hidden in diplomatic cargo, protected by immunity and silence. Jasmine didn't sleep for days. What could she do? Who could she tell? Everyone around her was either involved or terrified to speak up. So she did something no one expected. She disappeared. She left D.C. Under the radar, changed her name, and began tracking the routes herself. From Georgia to Ghana. From Morocco to Miami. From whispered names in back alleys to fake passports stamped in hotel bathrooms. She followed the chain. It was dangerous, illegal, lonely. She had no backup, no badge, no safety net. But what she did have was a fire that kept her moving, even when she was nearly caught in a warehouse raid in Cape Verde, or when she was chased through a market in Senegal by men with untraceable weapons. At one point, Jasmine posed as a shipping clerk for 6 months in Dubai, feeding information back to an underground network of journalists and rescue agents. At another, she embedded herself in a luxury resort in Rio de Janeiro, befriending a diplomat's wife who unknowingly helped her access a hidden ledger. Every time she thought about giving up, when her money ran out, when her identity was nearly exposed, when her body ached from sleeping in safe houses and bus stations, she thought about the list. The names, the children. And she kept going. She never told Stephen, not at first. When they met, she was already back in the States, teaching languages at a community college under her real name again. He thought she was brilliant, mysterious, a little hard to read, and that's what drew him to her. But she didn't let him all the way in until they were married, until he showed her he could be trusted not just with her heart, but with her secrets. One night, she showed him the file. The photos, the names, the safe houses. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said 5 words that still stayed with her. "You did what no one could." And from that moment on, they became a team. Jasmine left the shadow work behind, but the skills never left her. So, on the night Officer Brenner pulled her over, Jasmine wasn't just calm because she was used to speaking under pressure. She was calm because she had looked evil in the face before and walked away alive. But what she didn't know then, what no one expected, was that her past was about to come back. Because weeks after Brenner's suspension, Jasmine received a package. No name, no return address. Inside, a flash drive, encrypted, buried beneath a photograph of a girl Jasmine remembered too well, a girl she thought had been rescued. But the photo was recent. The timestamp didn't lie. And the location? Memphis, Tennessee, just 3 hours from Jasmine's home. She didn't tell Stephen. Not yet. He was already fighting political fires because of her case. But Jasmine couldn't wait. She dug through her old contacts, what few were still alive or reachable, and traced the drive's metadata to a warehouse near the riverfront. A new route, a new operation. Someone had restarted what she thought she ended. So she did the unthinkable. Again. She went alone. She dressed down, pulled on a hoodie, slipped a burner phone in her pocket, and drove through the dead of night. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It had been years since she walked this line, since she became someone else. But she slipped back into it like a second skin. The warehouse was guarded, but sloppily. 2 men, half asleep. Jasmine scoped the perimeter, climbed the back fence like she'd done 100 times before, and slipped through a side window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Rows of crates, sealed and unmarked, humming with the quiet whir of cooling units. And tucked in the corner, barely visible, was a girl, not much older than her own daughter, curled in a blanket, silent. Jasmine's heart split. She stepped forward carefully, whispered, "Hey, I'm here to help." The girl didn't respond, just stared. Jasmine reached into her pocket and held out a candy bar, her old trick. The girl took it. That was all the signal Jasmine needed. She sent a text to a former contact, a man in Baton Rouge who still owed her everything. Pick up. Now. Coordinates attached. Then she waited. For hours. In that warehouse, holding that girl's hand, listening for footsteps. Every second stretched like wire. When help finally came, Jasmine vanished before they could even say thank you. She slipped into the shadows like a ghost, drove home in silence, washed her hands 3 times, cried in the shower, then crawled into bed beside Stephen before dawn. He never asked where she went. But she knew this wasn't over. That package had been a message. Someone knew who she was, and someone was trying to pull her back in. So now, Jasmine lives two lives. The public one, the woman who survived an officer's gun, who speaks on stages, who fights for justice with a microphone. And the quiet one, the woman who still answers strange packages, who still knows how to vanish, who still listens for the whispers in places no one dares to look. You think you know Jasmine Carter. You only know part of her story. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the world only needs the version that comforts them, the speaker, the survivor, the strong black woman who didn't die on the sidewalk. But here's the truth. Jasmine Carter has been fighting for her life long before a cop pulled a weapon. And she's still fighting now. So if you're hearing this, if you're feeling the weight of what she carries, the strength it takes to keep standing, the risk she continues to take to protect those without voices, leave a comment right now. Tell her she's not alone. Let her know that you see her. Let her know you're with her. Let her know that what she did, the lives she saved, the dangers she faced, meant something. And press the like button, because every tap, every share, every voice raised in support adds one more shield between Jasmine and the darkness she still walks through. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scars, and sometimes they stand quietly in the shadows, watching, waiting, and ready to save the world again if they have to. There comes a moment in every person's life when silence is no longer an option. For Jasmine Carter, that moment came with the cold, metallic click of a police holster and the slow, steady raising of a gun pointed directly at her face. A moment where everything, her degrees, her career, her marriage to the FBI director, meant nothing. A moment where her skin was judged before her soul was seen. But what the world didn't know, what they couldn't have known just by watching the viral clip that lit the internet on fire, was that Jasmine's story didn't begin on that roadside. That was just the latest chapter in a life that had been quietly, painfully marked by the cruelty of racism and the strength it took to rise against it. Jasmine's truth stretched far beyond that moment. It started when she was just a child, growing up in Louisiana, where even the trees seemed to whisper warnings. She remembered the time her father was pulled over with her in the back seat, how the officer never once looked at him, only at the expired plate that somehow led to a trunk search, then to her father in handcuffs, then to a released warning after nothing was found. She remembered the way her mother shook as she tried to stay calm for Jasmine's sake. "Be still," her mother said. "Be quiet." Jasmine learned those words early, learned that being black and bold could get you killed. So she buried her boldness for years. She became the girl who followed every rule, made every honor roll, used her quiet voice to slip through places that didn't welcome her. She became fluent in 4 languages, not to impress, but to be needed, because being needed sometimes protected you from being dismissed. She became the woman who married Stephen Carter, who worked her way into the diplomatic world with quiet efficiency, who carried folders for men in power, who was always mistaken for the assistant, never the strategist. She endured the stares in boardrooms, the accidental slights, the moments when her hand was ignored during meetings, but her words were repeated 5 minutes later by someone else. Louder, whiter, and suddenly brilliant. But the real breaking point came when she discovered the list. An encrypted file slipped to her in an off-the-record meeting while she translated between ambassadors. The list that changed everything. Names of children trafficked under diplomatic immunity, protected by international blind spots, and men who shook hands too tightly. Jasmine had a choice: stay silent and safe, or speak and shatter everything. She chose neither. She vanished instead. The Jasmine the world never knew was a ghost in foreign cities, feeding intelligence to shadow organizations, tracing dark paths across oceans, sleeping in hostels, bruised from quick escapes, running from faceless men in elevators who knew her name when she didn't know theirs. She saved lives. She burned bridges. She never asked for credit. And then she came back, quietly, disguised in normalcy, teaching, marrying, living, until the day Officer Miles Brenner pulled her over and looked at her like she didn't belong, like none of it mattered. That day, Jasmine did what she had always done. She assessed the risk. She stayed calm. She recorded. She tried to de-escalate. But Brenner didn't want peace. He wanted power. And so, when he reached for the door, she locked it. When he reached for his gun, she met his eyes. She didn't flinch. Because Jasmine Carter had stared down worse monsters in darker places. She didn't blink when he called her uncooperative. She didn't beg when he ordered her to step out. She knew the rules, but she also knew her rights. And when she told him who she was, the wife of the FBI director, the moment cracked wide open. The media called it shocking. The footage was played on loop. They showed her calm face, her quiet resistance, the crowd forming around her car. They played the clip where her voice trembled but didn't break, where she said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." But what they didn't see, what the clip couldn't show, was the girl from Louisiana who had learned to fear flashing lights. The woman who had once dismantled an entire trafficking route with nothing but her intelligence and her will. The survivor who had rebuilt herself after every silent wound. And when Officer Brenner was disarmed by his own commanding officer, when he was placed on leave, then terminated, then prosecuted, Jasmine didn't celebrate. She cried. Not because justice was served, but because it almost wasn't. Because in another life, in another second, she could have been another name on a protest sign. Another body carried home in silence. Another black woman killed for failing to comply. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reckoning. She wanted the world to stop pretending this was new. She wanted people to know that Officer Brenner wasn't one man having a bad day. He was a symptom of something worse. A system that told him he could point a gun at a woman like Jasmine and get away with it. But this time, he didn't. Because Jasmine refused to be silent. The courtroom trial became a national stage. Jasmine testified with grace, but not without pain. She spoke about fear, about injustice, about what it means to be black and powerful in a country that punishes both. She told the jury about the moment she knew Brenner wasn't looking for a traffic violation. He was looking for submission. And she wouldn't give it. And when the guilty verdict came down, Jasmine didn't cheer. She stood tall, quiet, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not for herself, but for every voice that was silenced before hers could be heard. She walked out of that courtroom into a sea of reporters, supporters, critics. Cameras flashed. Mics rose. "Do you have anything to say?" one reporter asked. Jasmine turned to face the crowd, her voice steady. "This was never just about me," she said. "This was about all of us who've been told to sit down, stay quiet, survive. I chose to fight instead. And if you're still listening now, if you've followed her journey from the roadside to the courtroom, from silence to speaking, from surviving to saving, then know this: Jasmine Carter is not done. She continues to speak, to fight, to tell the truth. And not just about Officer Brenner, but about the hidden systems that protect people like him and silence women like her. She continues to stand for the children she once saved overseas, for the families still waiting for justice, for the young black girls watching her, learning that they don't have to shrink to survive. Jasmine Carter is living proof that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the calm voice that says no more. So now, it's your turn. If her story moved you, press the like button. If her strength inspired you, leave a comment to tell her. Let her know the world is listening. Let her know she's not standing alone. And now she's fighting for yours. Jasmine Carter used to believe that doing everything right would protect her. That if she followed the rules, spoke politely, dressed respectably, stayed calm, and carried herself with grace, she could move through this world untouched. For years, she built her life on that belief. She earned 2 degrees, married a man who rose through the ranks to become the FBI director, raised 2 beautiful children in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Brentwood, Tennessee, and carried herself with a calm strength that made everyone believe she was untouchable. But the night Officer Miles Brenner pulled a gun on her during a routine traffic stop, all those beliefs shattered. That night didn't start with fear, it started with habit. Jasmine was coming home from a book club meeting, the soft hum of a podcast filling the car, her mind still lingering on a passage someone had read aloud about injustice and identity. Then came the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She wasn't speeding. She had signaled every turn. Still, she pulled over and sighed, already knowing what this would be. She'd been here before, not just stopped by police, but sized up. Reduced to a stereotype. A black woman in a luxury SUV in a white neighborhood. Suspicious by default. She grabbed her phone without hesitation and hit record. Not because she planned to post anything, just because she had learned, painfully and clearly, that no one would believe her without proof. Officer Brenner approached like he had something to prove. Tall, broad, cold eyes, no smile. His hand hovered too close to his holster for someone supposedly pulling her over for a missed turn signal. Jasmine greeted him politely, calmly. She didn't argue. Didn't question, at first. But then came the tone. The questions that had nothing to do with the traffic stop. Where she was going, whether she lived nearby. "You don't look like someone from this neighborhood," he said with a smirk that twisted her stomach. Jasmine knew exactly what he meant. And in that moment she felt the quiet rage that only people who've been polite their whole lives know. She had paid for that car with her own money, paid taxes in that neighborhood for years, raised 2 children who said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." But none of that mattered. Not to him. She kept her voice even, her words careful. But something about her calmness, her poise, made Brenner angrier. He backed away, then returned, more aggressive. When he reached for the door handle, she locked it just in time. Her pulse roared in her ears. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "On what grounds?" she asked. That was when he reached for his gun. The people on the street saw it. Neighbors stepped outside. Phones came out. And Jasmine, with a gun pointed at her face, held her phone up and said 7 words that changed everything. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." What followed was a blur. A commanding officer arrived. Brenner was disarmed. Jasmine drove home, her hands shaking so hard she had to pull over twice to breathe. That moment, broadcast across the country, would come to define her. But what no one saw was the pain that followed. The weight of being strong for everyone else while breaking in silence. The next morning, Jasmine opened her inbox to thousands of messages, some supportive, many hateful. You should have gotten out of the car. You played the victim. You ruined a good cop's career. She ignored most of them, but it was the quiet rejection from her own community that hurt most. Neighbors stopped speaking. Moms from school whispered. A friend she had known for years canceled lunch without explanation. People weren't just uncomfortable, they were angry that she had made them confront something ugly in a neighborhood that prided itself on being progressive. She couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made her sit upright in bed. Her children started asking questions she didn't know how to answer. "Mommy, are police bad? Will that man come back?" Her daughter drew a picture of Jasmine behind a steering wheel with a big red heart over her chest. Jasmine stared at it for hours, realizing just how close she had come to being a memory. She started driving different routes, leaving lights on at night, checking locks twice. The trauma didn't shout. It whispered constantly, gnawing at her peace. But the most painful part came in court. When Brenner's defense tried to spin the story, accusing her of being defensive, combative, resistant. When lawyers dissected her tone, her posture, her choice to record, they turned her survival into suspicion. She had never felt so exposed. But Jasmine didn't break, because behind every painful moment was a deeper fire, one lit years ago. She remembered being 13, watching her father pulled out of the car for a broken taillight. Remembered her mother gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding her together. Remembered the officer's sneer, the way he said, "You people think you're above the law." That night, her father came home. But something changed in all of them. They learned a lesson not taught in schools. You can do everything right and still be seen as wrong. So no, Jasmine didn't break. She stood in court and told her truth. Her voice didn't tremble. Her words didn't stumble. "He didn't see a woman," she said. "He saw a threat, and I was only a threat because of my skin." She didn't need pity. She needed people to see, and people did see. Across the country, mothers wrote to her. Survivors wrote to her. Officers, some active, some retired, wrote to her. Not everyone hated her for what she'd done. Some finally found their voice through hers. One woman said, "I've been silent my whole life. You reminded me I don't have to be." Jasmine carried those messages like armor. Then the verdict came. Guilty. Officer Miles Brenner was convicted of misconduct and reckless endangerment. He was stripped of his badge, removed from the force. The courtroom was quiet, not because people weren't shocked, but because they were moved. Justice had shown up for once, and people were holding their breath. Jasmine walked out of that courthouse to a sea of flashing cameras, but she didn't smile. She didn't raise a fist. She placed her hand on her chest, closed her eyes, and let herself feel, not triumph, release. Later that night, alone in her room, she opened her journal and wrote the words she hadn't said out loud. "I survived. But I shouldn't have had to." Because Jasmine Carter wasn't a hero by choice. She was a hero because the world gave her no other option. She was forced to become stronger than fear, louder than silence. She wasn't just a victim of racism. She was a witness to its quiet violence, its everyday cruelty, its power to strip dignity in an instant. So now, if you're listening, if you've made it this far, know this. Jasmine's story isn't just about her. It's about all of us. It's about every person who's ever been dismissed, disrespected, or endangered because of who they are. It's about the nights that steal our peace, the mornings we rise anyway, the courage it takes to stay, to speak, to heal, to keep going. And Jasmine is still going. She speaks at schools. She works with civil rights groups. She shares her story not because she wants to relive it, but because she knows someone else might need it to survive their own. So, if her story touched you, press the like button. Leave a comment. Let her know you stand with her. Let her know her pain wasn't invisible. Let her know her strength inspired you. Let her know the fight she endured mattered. Because Jasmine Carter did everything right. And still, she almost didn't make it home. But now, with your voice beside hers, she's making sure the world never forgets. Jasmine Carter stood beneath the soft morning light filtering through her kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, not because she needed the warmth, but because it reminded her she was still here, alive, safe, after everything she had been through. After the night Officer Miles Brenner pointed a gun at her face for nothing more than being a black woman in a nice car. After the court trial, the threats, the interviews, the painful silence from people she once called friends. Jasmine had finally made it to the other side. Not untouched, not unchanged, but stronger, wiser, and most of all, unbroken. The verdict had come weeks ago, guilty on all counts. On all, the former officer stripped of his badge, removed from the force, and sentenced for his abuse of power. Jasmine didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. Justice, though long overdue, had finally arrived. Not just for her, but for every person who ever sat in a car, heart pounding, praying they'd make it home. That chapter was closed. And Jasmine wasn't interested in revenge. She was building something bigger now, something lasting. The woman who once believed that silence was safety had become a voice so powerful it shook the system. Not just because of her strength in the face of danger, but because she dared to be vulnerable afterward. She dared to admit she was scared, that she lost sleep, that she cried in private, that she struggled to walk to her mailbox without glancing over her shoulder. And yet, she still chose to fight. The hardest part wasn't surviving that night. It was surviving everything after it. The isolation, the guilt, the pressure to be strong when she wanted to collapse, the weight of being a symbol. But Jasmine carried it all, not because she wanted to be famous, but because she knew the truth. Her story could save someone else. So she turned her pain into purpose. She began working with local youth programs, mentoring Black and brown teens on how to advocate for themselves. She launched a podcast, Still Breathing, where she gave survivors of racial profiling and police abuse a platform to tell their stories. No scripts, no edits, just raw truth. Within a few weeks, the podcast had thousands of subscribers, each episode ending with a quiet reminder. You're not alone, you're still breathing, and you still matter. But Jasmine didn't stop there. She helped develop a training curriculum for law enforcement, sharing her own experience, even showing the footage of the night that nearly changed everything. Many officers sat in stunned silence. Some looked away. Others cried. And one young recruit came up to her after a session and whispered, "I thought I knew what the badge meant. Now I know what it should mean." That single sentence was worth every tear Jasmine had shed in the dark. People often asked her how she stayed so calm, how she didn't explode with rage. Her answer was always the same. Because if I had, I wouldn't be here to tell the story, and someone had to live to tell it. She taught people that bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the way you hold your voice steady when fear is crawling up your throat. Sometimes it's choosing not to open the car door. Sometimes it's saying no when the world expects you to fold. And through it all, she never lost her grace. Even when old wounds reopened, even when hate mail came, even when her own daughter asked her, "Mommy, will a cop ever point a gun at me too?" And Jasmine had to answer with a truth that shattered her. "I hope not, baby. But if they do, you keep your hands up, you stay calm, and you remember who you are." Because at the core of everything, Jasmine's story wasn't about just one woman or one bad cop. It was about a system that needs to be rebuilt, a culture that needs to listen, a people who need to believe Black lives are not only precious, but worthy of protection, dignity, and peace. She didn't ask to be a hero. She just refused to be a victim. And now, as she stood in her kitchen, the sun painting gold across her countertops, she allowed herself something she hadn't in a long time: peace. Not because the world was fixed, not because racism had disappeared, but because she had found her purpose and used her voice in a way that no bullet, no badge, no bigot could erase. Her children now walked taller. Her community rallied together. And even some officers reached out, not in defense, but in apology, and in hope to do better. To the world, she was the woman who stood her ground. To her family, she was simply Mom. To herself, she was finally whole. And to everyone listening right now, wherever you are, hear this. Her story is more than a headline. It's a lesson. It's a mirror. It's a call. Because one day, it might be you sitting in the driver's seat, heart racing, wondering what to say, how to move, whether you'll make it home. And Jasmine's story, it's the roadmap. It's the proof that you can stay calm, stay strong, and still demand justice. So here's what her story teaches us all. Never let anyone reduce your worth to your skin color. Never let fear steal your voice. And never underestimate the power of your truth, even when it shakes. Jasmine Carter didn't go viral for clapping back or shouting. She went viral for standing still, looking power in the face, and saying, "Enough." She survived that night not because she was lucky, but because she was prepared. Because she was unshakable. Because she believed in something greater than fear. And now she's using her story to light the path for others. So if you've been moved by her journey, if you cried when she spoke, clenched your fists when she was pulled over, held your breath when the gun was drawn, and exhaled only when she said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," then please, press the like button right now. Leave a comment. Tell Jasmine what her story meant to you. Let her feel your support. Let her know she is not alone. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like Jasmine's. Stories that need to be told. Stories that can heal. Stories that can inspire a movement. Every like, every comment, every new subscriber helps ensure stories like this don't get buried. They get heard. They get remembered. And most of all, they remind the world that justice doesn't come easy, but it comes when we demand it together. Thank you for listening to Jasmine Carter's story. Thank you for standing with her. And always remember, stay aware, stay brave, stay breathing. We'll see you in the next story.